This episode of the Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 83 of the Construction Record podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today. And with me for this podcast,
Digital Media Editor Warren Frey,
and Journal of Commerce staff writer Russell Hixson.
Well, guys, here we are. We've been reporting remotely and working remotely now, going on 9 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that.
Forever.
Yeah. Some days it kind of feels like that.
3 years in COVID time.
And I swear, like, I look at the news cycle that we're in and what we cover. And I know 2 episodes ago we talked about where we at on this COVID-19 impact arc on construction. We had talked about the shock and awe of the beginning, and then the industry kind of getting its legs underneath it and trying to figure out what to do. I'm actually quite surprised where we're at right now about some of the things we're going to talk about. It almost feels like people are like, hey, okay, we're through it now. You know what I mean? We got this pandemic under control. Let's just keep building. Let's just keep rolling along.
Not specific to construction, but are we really under control here, people?
Yeah, like, I mean, and that's the thing I wonder about. I heard it. I wish I could use this term and claim this term as my own, but it isn't. I heard this health practitioner here in Ontario say that it's the tug of war between health and wealth right now.
Right.
And that's what's pushing everything. And I think our industry is kind of right in the middle of that, right? You got a lot of big players, a lot of big projects, and it's about keeping them rolling and keeping people employed. And guys are anxious to keep having the okay, pretty much, to keep building, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I can speak to a couple of examples. I talked to these guys, Super Metal, who are doing all the metal work on the Vancouver Public Library, or not, sorry, the library, the post office, which is like this iconic, kind of old-looking building, which they're redoing into the Amazon facility, or near it anyway. And they're also doing one across the street, which is this tower. And they said, in terms of social distancing, it's all logistics. Like, they've got the same amount of guys working on it, but in having a lunchroom, they normally would have 50 people, have to have staggered 10 people. You can have all those guys working, but they've got to leave at certain times and come back at certain times, and so it's doable. It's just a question of how you plan it out.
Right. And Russ, you had compiled a bunch of stuff looking at social media and kind of those logistics some people were tackling to make their sites safe, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about it last time we were all together, not together, but virtually together chatting, is since we've had a few weeks, more than a few weeks, it seems like a lot of the larger companies, larger construction contractors are catching up, and they're developing solutions. I mean, you see, PCL the other day, I saw them posting online about they have like screening C-can containers that they're building, and it seems like there's a lot of innovation, and other people, they're building sanitation stations and hand washing stations, and they're just getting more and more sophisticated about operating under this environment, which, I mean, the first week everyone's panicking and scrambling, going, we have all these new requirements, what do we do? And now they're going, oh, here's a better way to do this, here's a better way to do that, oh, we figured out how to do this, we figured out how to do that. And now, a lot of provinces are announcing their phased plans, where it's not as dramatic in BC as it is in Ontario or Quebec or some other provinces, because we never stop building. But there's definitely more of a sense of optimism, I think, in BC, whereas the officials, the health officials, are saying, well, it's currently it's pretty under control, and so now we can start looking ahead a little bit and think about, well, can we do a little bit more business? Can we do a little bit more business? And that's what we're going to be doing in the next few months in BC with our phase plan. And construction, as far as I know, well, there are some exceptions. There was that outbreak at Curl Lake oil sands facility, and it's just gotten worse and worse. I think last I checked, it was up to 83 related cases, and they were in Saskatchewan, and then BC was very concerned about all the cases from the workers who fly in and fly out. And Saskatchewan was trying to investigate and track down everybody involved with that. But other than that, I haven't heard of a major outbreak on a construction site or in a construction-related environment in BC. I'm sure. I mean, I don't know if it's happened, but as far as I know, there hasn't been one. And so we keep building.
Yeah.
I know.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Warren. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I know with these super metal guys specifically, but I'm sure other companies too, they're kind of ahead of the curve in a way. They said, well, we already had the protective equipment. We already have welding masks. We already have all this stuff that kind of we were able to use anyway. So a lot of this stuff, yeah, we got to worry about it, but we don't have to worry about it as much as, let's say, some office does, right? So.
Yeah, and here in Ontario, it was kind of like those early days. We saw a couple of sites get closed down because they didn't have the right COVID rules, regulations, and parameters set up to continue working.
Yep.
There was 2 sites that got shut down because a worker tested positive, but there was no, not that we found through our reporting, no significant evidence that it was caused by something at the site. But the worker contracted it there, and that there was no outbreak. And that kind of leads us to today, like the Ontario announcement, just a few hours before we sat here to record this podcast. Our premier, Doug Ford, announced that Ontario is entering stage 1 of opening up for business again. And part of that stage 1 was taking the shackles off, essentially, that were put in place on construction over the last few weeks. Interesting thing is like construction was still working on a lot of major infrastructure was still going on. And quite frankly, we didn't really see a major slowdown, even in residential construction and other construction here in the province. A lot of questions were asked. A lot of companies reacted and tried to set up their sites, so they can work under a pandemic. But here we are, and we had Clive Thurston, the head of the Ontario General Contractors Association. I'll just read what he said in reaction to the announcement today from the Premier. That this is fantastic. We can get back to work. We can continue to improve our health and safety, and we can get the economy going again. The Premier recognized the information we provided that the WSIB, that's the Workplace Safety Insurance Board here in Ontario, hasn't had a single case, meaning COVID case, related to construction. And that really turned the tide. It was nip and tuck. So to your point too, there was nothing here that proved that, okay, construction needs to be shut down still or restricted because of this pandemic.
Waiting for it. I was waiting for that one. There was going to be a major site where as soon as there's a major outbreak at a large site, that's it. They're shutting it down. And that never happened in BC. And I guess it never happened in Ontario either.
But we're back to how we started this conversation, though. I wonder, is we're acting as if it's over. That's the sense that I get a bit. Won't you?
I'm not personally. I'm still self-isolating like crazy.
Yeah. I know as people we are completely. Our office too, both our Burnaby and Markham offices, we're all working from home.
Right.
You know what I mean? Doing all the different aspects of the Construct Connect business and the DCN and JOC business. But the industry is going to move forward, and hopefully that. The one thing, you were saying with the CCAN stuff, and it makes me think this industry is built on innovation. Believe it or not, people it's slow to innovate sometimes with new technology, but the people that are the practitioners of construction always try to figure out stuff. They're always trying to figure out something. And over the last couple of weeks, they proved that they can, right? So,
that's the thing is construction's very, this isn't just construction, but it's very profit driven. And if you can find out a more efficient, a better way to do something, you're going to make more profit. So I think that's what makes some of these larger companies, like a PCL, like a Graham, like a, whatever Bird. That's what makes the company big is they're able to do things smarter, faster, cheaper, quicker. That's innovation. And that's what makes a company so big, I'd assume. And so I think a lot of those companies that have the resources and the ability to put teams on this and start to innovate are doing that. And I'm still seeing, provinces award contracts for, highway projects, for schools. People are still bidding on projects and going to work.
I can categorically say, and this is not meant to self-promotion. Anybody that listens to this podcast knows we don't sit here and wave the flag about how awesome our company is. Nope. We play it on the line as journalists. We think we're really great, but but the demand for the project data that we collect as a company, the demand for that type of tendering information, the demand for the content we were creating, which was leads for this industry and figuring out what they were supposed to do. It never waned over the last 9 weeks. It actually picked up. When you look at that window of time, it was incredible, the activity. This industry didn't rest. They were trying to figure out how to make it work, right? Because as to your point, there's money on the line. You know what I mean? There's investment on the line here, right? So,
well, a lot of projects have had their timelines adjusted. and they're having to manage people's expectations of when things are going to be done. I've seen that on a lot of major projects.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to see. Interesting to see, like we talk about Ontario, but we'll look and see what Quebec kind of being, it seems like the center. Well, not the center, the biggest, the most impacted province in a way when it comes to this pandemic, and in particular Montreal. Like in that construction industry is very different compared to the ones that we regularly report on. It's such a kind of a closed industry. But they've been operating throughout all this, through all the madness they've seen in their healthcare systems, in their schools, in Montreal in general. Construction's still been rolling forward there, pretty much, right? So, but what else is on the go, Wes, that we should be keeping an eye on, that you guys have been reporting on? What's kind of percolating to the front?
Well, for me, for instance, I just put out a story about how the government a couple days ago announced they're not spending new money in infrastructure, but they're sort of funneling towards more COVID-related stuff. And so I got a BC reaction from that. And one of the things that Chris Gardner from the ICBA said is that there's two things we should be concentrating on here: ports and airports and things that are moving goods in and out that can benefit everybody. And the other thing is the sweet spot, which is what most contracting is, to a point, which is $50 to $100 million projects, as opposed to these big marquee ones. He's like, that way a lot more people around the province and not just in the big centers will get to work on stuff. And so that was, you don't often hear that, but he's right. That is, I've also Fiona Famluck from the VRCA, she said this is a very good first step, but it's concentrating on a few things, and there's more stuff we could be concentrating on. And there's more money we could be putting towards these things too. Also, there's a cutoff date of 2021, which is sort of a double-edged sword, because people were saying the last time this happened, 2008, 2009, everybody said shovel ready, and it was kind of a standing joke in the industry because nothing was. And now they've done the exact opposite tack, which everybody thinks is a good idea, but also you've only got till 2021. That kind of narrows the scope of what you can work on. It's stuff that already been approved of, or that isn't as complicated as other things. So like anything, it's got its good and its bad points.
Yeah, I'm seeing provinces start to kind of unveil their stimulus plans, some of them, in terms of infrastructure spending. I mean, you had Saskatchewan announce their $7.5 billion 2-year capital plan, which is a $2 billion increase to just kind of pour money into the economy by building infrastructure and trying to create jobs, which, of course, all of our contacts in that province are ecstatic about. So you see that's kind of Saskatchewan's strategy. You also saw Manitoba unveil a $500 million infrastructure kind of building plan as well to kind of stimulate the economy. And I suspect, in the coming months and years, we're going to see probably more of that as they try and get people to work. Because, I mean, it seems like we said before, construction can continue as long as, these companies follow the guidelines, relatively safely. As far as I can tell, and if those people can work and generate income and stimulate the economy, that's something that's desperately needed.
Well, on that point around that stimulus funding, we were seeing it as far as talking to the national stakeholders and some of the Ontario stakeholders. Same thing. A lot of them kind of pointing to it'll help the smaller firms. That was kind of their sense. You know what I mean? And that's important because depending on the stat that you look at, 70 to 78% of the Canadian construction industry are smaller firms, 0 to 25 people, right? Yeah. And if they're not involved in residential projects, they're, add-ons to other type of heavy civil or civil works, and, keeping them working and running is a good thing for this industry and the economy in general, right? What was it? The detail on that was Ottawa would pick up something like 80% of the cost of the projects, I think, is the details around the kind of stimulus planning, I think.
Yeah, which is up from 50%.
Up from 50. Okay. All right. So, no, that's, but it's not official yet. It hasn't been legislated yet. That was kind of the nuance, I think, right now. Like this is the government's thinking as far as this program, as far as I understand. You guys haven't heard any difference since we last reported on it?
Not yet.
No.
But also, and this is not specific to this, but at first everybody's like, we're all in this together when it comes to COVID stuff. And we're getting to the point now where that's not going to be quite the case anymore. Like, we're used to it a bit, and, it's already happening. The Conservatives and the NDP are kind of criticizing it a bit more than they were before, which is fine. That's all well and good, but that's probably what we're going to see more of. So we might see some pushback on this. Who knows?
I mean, another interesting pattern that sorry, go ahead, Vince.
No, go ahead. No, I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, I've noticed like an interesting pattern with a lot of this infrastructure spending is it kind of goes into two buckets. One is just like Warren said, shovel ready, like immediate. What can we do right now to get tools in the hands of people to get them working today, immediately, to get money just flowing. And then the second is trade enabling infrastructure. I was talking to the Port of Vancouver the other day, and they have a huge $1 billion port expansion that they want to do, and they say that would accomplish both. Not only would it get people working, it would also set up the economy to do more international trade and generate more economic activity going forward. So I think they're looking kind of short term and long term. They need projects that people can just immediately get on the site and do now, and stuff that is going to benefit the country's trade enabling infrastructure in the long term, like highways, ports, roads, transportation type related stuff. Rail.
And here we are in mid-spring, essentially, right? We're in the heart of construction season, right? We're going to be heading into the heart of construction season. We're at the beginning of it, and it's key. You know what I mean? If we want to successfully start completing some of those projects you're talking about, now's the time to start getting those wheels really moving, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
I think something that's going to start happening now that we are past kind of the shock and awe of the pandemic is people are going to start, having a little bit of hindsight, and they're going to look back and have a real discussion about how things were handled. And that's what's happening right now in Manitoba. A story hasn't come out yet that I'm working on. I've been talking to the province and to the government workers union. And the union's really unhappy with what happened with inspections on job sites and how those went down and how they were altered. And they feel like a lot of workers were put at risk. And even just this ties into a story I wrote about a week ago about a worker who was killed in a trench collapse. And that's still being investigated. We don't know what caused that. But the union said that just highlights how important it is to have people on sites inspecting things and making sure that employers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And they feel like the province dropped the ball on that. And I think that is likely going to happen going forward as we start to get into more of a routine and in a little bit more certainty. We're going to see people look back and start thinking about how things were done.
To your point, Russ, it's true. There wasn't ever a playbook, really, the pandemic playbook. We hear about it being debated down south on what playbook, what I mean, the Trump administration wants to not look at from the CDC and whatnot. But kind of in seriousness, like our industry really didn't have one. There's playbooks around the health and safety and inspections around the stuff that we're used to having to work around or in.
Right.
And it does probably create an opportunity for a pause for reflection and looking at what we did. And because there could be a second wave of this in the fall,
or new pandemics a few years down the road.
Right.
Well, provinces did things differently. Some provinces, shut stuff down immediately. Some didn't. And it's going to be interesting to go back and analyze how different, industries and communities fared based on the response. Or maybe it's not relevant because the way they operate businesses differently. The way Quebec does business is different than the way BC does. And their response is different. So I think there's going to be absolute mountains of data for people to pour through and try and glean some knowledge from this. So it'll be interesting.
It'll be interesting. I'm curious to see what the federal bodies in construction, the federal association, the national associations, as we call them, what are they going to do with some of this data? You know what I mean? Because certainly they didn't have, and it's not a critique of them. I thought they've been trying to do the best they can from lobbying efforts, advocacy efforts. Once they kind of got their legs under the ground and figured what they're supposed to do and what the issues are in certain jurisdictions that report up to them, like groups like the Canadian Construction Association, the Mechanical Contractors Association, the Architects, RAIC, ACEC, the engineers, you kind of saw it. There we were asking them questions from the outset, and a lot of them were like, I have no idea, essentially off the record kind of thing.
They were honest. A lot of them were really honest with me too. They said, we were waiting. We don't know. We are asking. We're not experts on this. We want to know, and we're waiting.
Yeah. So now when that data comes in, that collection, when this is done, once again, we're back to this discussion, talking as if things are wrapping up, right?
Which they are not.
They are not, what are they going to do with that intel? Like, how does it change the business practices of construction? I'm excited by the fact that we get to cover that and ask those questions, right? What's going to change about this industry we're so kind of just accustomed to covering in certain ways?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't see how OHS is the same ever.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I just don't. I don't see how health and safety in construction and every other industry doesn't have just a dramatic shift going forward.
And all
I
that
just don't
changes the
see
way
that
these
not
businesses do business. And then it changes how you build a place, too. If you're building a restaurant, now it might have to be socially isolated. You might have to, plexiglass might be a thing you have to worry about now. You know, like what stuff isn't going to get built? Like a big conference center that they pour $1 billion into. Are they going to do that anymore? Maybe not, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they used to think it was insane to have to put seatbelts in cars. They said, that's ridiculous. That's too much money. That's insane. I mean, I feel like this could be a similar level of shift where it's like, we will look back and go, I can't believe we didn't have this, and this on job sites. And we didn't, to be fair, like we didn't know this was going to happen, but we could look back and see this as a humongous shift in OHS.
Mm-hmm. When I think about office spaces, I think about our office spaces because both of them went through recent renovations, both of Markham and Burnaby. And, you know, there was this conscious effort, openness, you know what I mean? Community spaces, collaboration spaces where people are cross-pollinating from department to department, all with the good intent of building culture. And, you know, and it's like, well, here we are. It's like, whenever we go back, is that ever going to be the same anymore? Right.
And if companies don't go back, then somebody's got to build whatever that building becomes because they're going to use it for something. You know what I mean? Maybe it's housing. Maybe it's who knows what, right? Yeah.
And I'm sure, I think between the three of us, I think we had mentioned that it's like we've seen the meme or GIF or the joke online is like, you know, the perfect pandemic fighting office. It has these things, these partitions that are 4 feet tall and you box a person in or, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, well, essentially running the joke of that's where we got away from. You know what I mean? The cubicles, the multi-offices.
What every architect would scoff at as being barbaric.
Yeah, and here we are. It's like, well, that's maybe something that's a good pandemic fighter, you know? So it's interesting. And how do those spaces get built, you know, and which part of this industry benefits from that? The maintenance and renovation side of things, right? The people that get in, the owners that get mobilized to make their properties appealing for the future. Is this something new that they can hang their hat on? It's like, look, you know what I mean? Not pandemic proof, but you know what I mean? Yeah.
If you're doing residential construction, are you building specific rooms for work? You might be, you know?
Well, I actually chatted with someone about this. He's an infection prevention and control expert. And Warren, I think I actually chatted with you about this last podcast. Is he talked about how builders are going to have to get more sophisticated because even modern hospitals that have been built in the last like 1 or 2 years, some of them don't have pandemic-related isolation infrastructure. They didn't even do it. So, I mean, that's going to change. I mean, so any hospital built post-COVID-19 is going to be far more probably specialized. And I mean, it's already difficult for a contractor to build a hospital project, and it's going to become more difficult. And so I think contractors are probably going to have to get a lot more sophisticated about some of the systems and things that are needed for these buildings that are a bit more, quote, pandemic resilient, end quote, right?
For sure. Well, with that, I don't have much else to hear other than to say to our listeners and our readers, thank you for constantly kind of seeking out our content and reading it and listening to us. We've been trying to keep this industry as informed as best as possible. And I really think our teams have really done a great job over the last few weeks under some interesting circumstances.
And another note. It was construction month. So, you know, a big thank you to all the workers who are out there, you know, still, you know, on the tools and working hard and building infrastructure and doing their thing. So, thanks, guys and girls.
Exactly. It's a kudos to them all. And you know, going forward, obviously, still we're keeping an eye on all these developments and how they affect the industry and the safety of the people in it, you know, and by all means, we love to hear from you all, whether it's via the emails attached to our stories or responding to this podcast. With that, I'm good from the East, boys. On your end,
all right.
Anything else?
Good from the West, I think.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.